PowerPoint.
Okay, and we are live.
Okay. I'd like to call to order the Friday, February 16th meeting of the State Advisory Committee on Historic Preservation. Out there, making sure I had the right date. General welcome. The State Advisory Committee on Historic Preservation is a 9-member committee appointed by the governor to review documentation for all state of Oregon nominations to the National Register of Historic Places. The committee meets 3 times a year, or maybe more, to review nominations brought forward by the State Historic Preservation Office. The committee also advises the State Historic Preservation Office on matters of program, policy, and budget. At this time, we will introduce ourselves. I can start. I'm Heidi Flava from the Central Oregon Bend region.
Julie Osborne, I live in Astoria.
I'm Steve Mark, Port Klamath.
Jacqueline Chung from the Dalles.
Cassie Rippey from Salem.
Greg Shine from Portland.
Do we have committee members on the online?
We do have Gwendolyn online.
No. Mark either?
Nope, it should just be for Gwen. Gwen. Can we see if Gwen can hear us?
Hi, Gwen, can you hear us today? For now?
They're connecting on you. And when it looks like maybe if you unmute yourself, if you're able to hear us.
Maybe we'll check back
Okay.
with her before we.
All right, we'll do some housekeeping while you guys figure that out. For those of you who are new to this building, we have restrooms out this door as well as water up that way. Our main exit is out the door that you probably came in, so it's not too far from us here. We do have a sign-in sheet, looks like Val's on top of that one. If you do wish to speak today, so please go ahead and sign in on that sheet. There's also testimony cards if you want to speak of anything that's not on the agenda or on the agenda, right? Okay. Anything else? Would you guys like to introduce yourselves?
Sure. My name is Ian Johnson. I'm the Associate Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer.
Robert O'Gean, the National Register Program Coordinator.
I'm Mary Newcomb, the Programs Administrative Assistant.
I'm Val Ballstrom, Preservation Bureau Assistant.
Okay, so do we have anybody who wishes to speak on things that are not on the agenda?
Yeah, that's part.
Just look around, make sure you guys are all here for things on the agenda. All right, well then we will move on to review and approval of the October 2023 meeting minutes. Did anybody have any comments on those?
No, I moved that we accept.
Have a motion to approve the minutes as written. Anyone want to second that?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Of the motion to approve? Then we will vote. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
Hi,
Yay, Glenn, we can hear you.
good. Yeah, you stopped my background, so you may not see me.
Okay.
If I don't have a different background.
All right, well, glad to have you on board with us today.
Thank you.
All right, so I do want to just say an additional welcome to our new, our two new mission members. So thank you, Cassie, and you go by Cassie, right? And then Gregory, go by Greg. Okay. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. All right. Next is review and approval of the agenda for today. Are there any changes or modifications we need to make?
No. Not from staff.
What about the review of the Hotel Alma?
What, you mean in terms of staff?
And then in
That's,
terms of our internal,
I mean, that's not necessarily an agenda change, that's just a internal. It just means we don't have a lead reviewer.
all right. Anybody like to make a motion for our agenda today? Yes.
A second. Or, no, a motion. I move that we accept the agenda.
I'll second. Thank you. All right, all those in favor of our agenda for today? Aye. Perfect.
Hi.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Well then, Ian, am I going to turn it over to you for SHPO updates?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and be happy to do that.
Thank
So,
you.
Robert spoke briefly in our pre-session agenda item where we're talking about training about our 10-year preservation plan. That plan, previously planned, ended last year in 2023. We have an extension to through June to finish our current plan. It will be a 10-year plan. And so we are finishing that up. I'm incorporating comments from August. So, and the reason why the plan was delayed is we had a number of, which I'll speak about a little bit. We had some staff take positions in other agencies or retire, and I was put on staff work. So that's where my time went working on that. But we'll have it done, and it will be a 10-year plan. Previously, our plans were 5 years, so this is a great thing. We'll be able to kind of work on some longer term projects that take more time to develop, which is the argument we made to the Park Service. So you'll be seeing a copy of that soon. We are still continuing to work on appointments for this committee. We still have 2 more positions to come up with, so we're working on that. That's primarily Chrissy's role, but if you have any recommendations, you can push those over to Robert. We hope to have this committee fully staffed. It is a statewide problem, staffing commissions right now. They're real backed up at the governor's office, and they are working furiously to figure that out. So we're in better shape than many in that we have quorum. So we're happy about that. But they are working hard to fix that. We have an upcoming event next Wednesday. It is our Intergovernmental Council on Cultural Resource Council, ICRC. It's a group of state agencies, federal agencies, and tribal agencies and representatives that meet to kind of discuss cultural resource issues. Generally, it's kind of a, among governments type meeting. We discuss a variety of topics, but I'm announcing it to this group in case you'd like me to forward an invitation. We're going to have the National Park Service and the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation there. Representatives joining us virtually from Washington, D.C. to talk about determination of eligibility and how those are documented. So of course, under the compliance process, cultural resource laws, that's done one way to a certain level of completeness. And then under the National Park Service, well, you're seeing it, the National Register nomination. So that should be an interesting session. It'll be Wednesday morning. So if you're interested, you can let me know. I'd be happy to forward you an invitation. A few other things. Chrissy and I had the opportunity to speak with Wilbert Alick, who is the State Historic Preservation Officer for the Marshallese Islands. If you're not aware, Marshallese Islands are an independent sovereign nation located in the South Pacific. but they have signed a compact of free association with the United States, which that means we share a mutual defense, special trade arrangements, but also certain government functions, which happens to be a state historic preservation office. Oregon has a very large Marshallese community, has grown since the 1970s, and he brought a couple of community organizations, their leaders, to a meeting with us, as well as a graduate student at Oregon State University. We're able to talk about that community's needs and how our programs may or may not be useful for their larger goal of memorializing their own culture among themselves, but also sharing it with others. And so we hope that's going to be more of a partnership over time. Chrissy will be, who's the State Historic Preservation, Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer. She's going to be going to Washington, D.C. in March for the annual National Conference of State Historic Preservation Officers meeting. That's their annual meeting where they go to the Hill and they talk to our legislators about the importance of historic preservation and the needs of the community there. She will also be, if it goes through, on the 250th birthday commission for the country. The legislators in session right now in the short session, and that's they're looking to approve a committee on Senate Bill 15321. So should that bill pass, Chrissy will be our representative there. Other government task force, the governors reconvened the task force on Oregon tribal cultural items. It was first put together in 2017 with the mission to obtain information relating to cultural items currently held in storage or on display at Oregon state agencies, state universities, colleges, and public schools. This second reiteration of the task force is going to consider a process for soliciting information from state public institutions and agencies about items they may have in storage or on display associated with Oregon tribes, and then go ahead and develop some next steps about determining the provenance of those items, the appropriate custodian, and the appropriate storage and display of such items. So that will be convening here shortly. Another future event, the Oregon Heritage Conference, will be April 17th and 20th in Forest Grove. It's the first in-person conference since 2018, so we're very excited. The theme is Make Space. So with the idea that, you know, we are so busy in our work and professional lives, it's very unusual to get an opportunity to meet with colleagues and to discuss issues and really think about what you're doing as an organization, whether that's a government agency or a small museum. So there's going to be a lot of emphasis on how do you create that space or that time to do that kind of long-term thinking about planning and organizing your organization. You can all attend for free because you're commission members. So if you're interested in that, you can contact Robert. Registration opens online Wednesday, I believe, next week. And then staffing. So with the new year, we had folks move on with new adventures. We talked a little bit about it over lunch. Mary Beth Grover, who was our associate with our compliance program, was the first person to contact, logged all of our cases. She retired. And I believe she's sitting in Mexico right now on the beach, or will be shortly. That was her plan anyway. We also, Jessica Gabriel, who is our above ground compliance reviewer. She left us in October for U.S. Army Corps, as did Jason Allen. He was our survey and inventory coordinator. And then Shane James is working right across the courtyard here in a different agency. He became their archaeologist. So we're in the process of filling those positions. We've got job announcements out closing Monday evening for 2 archaeologists, and we will have job announcements out for Jessica and Jason's position shortly. We're also hiring a limited duration position to assist with the Preservation Bureau, which is our National Register survey, inventory, and tax projects, the extra volume there. And then we'll be hiring a state temp for 6 months to backfill an expected temporary staff vacancy. So we are in the process of staffing up as we can. We've also welcomed a couple of new folks. So Mary has been with us since November. So, and Val joined us in, they've already introduced themselves, but Val joined us in January. And then Dylan Chalakos joined us in mid-January. He is taking Mary Beth's position. So that is where we're at this point. So lengthy update, a lot of different items to cover. Any questions about any of that? Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Thanks. We don't have staff training on our agenda.
Nope, not today.
We already did some of that over our little break. So are we ready to move on to our first National Register nomination?
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments for staff this time? Let's do it. All right, I'm gonna read a short little blip. Just bear with me. The National Register of Historic Places is the nation's official list of districts, sites, buildings, structures, and objects significant in American history, architecture, archaeology, and culture. The records are maintained in Washington, D.C. by the National Park Service under the authority of the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966. Over 2,000 properties located in all 36 counties of Oregon are listed in the National Register. Oregon listings presently include over 150 historic districts. In order to qualify for listing in the National Register, a property must possess and retain its historic appearance and be historically important at the local, state, or national level. A property's historic importance is determined through one of 4 criteria identified by the National Park Service. Those criteria are association with events that have made a significant contribution to the broad patterns of our history, association with a preeminent individual, displaying distinctive characteristics of a type, period, method of construction, or work of a master, or contains the potential to yield important information on prehistory or history. The review process is limited to the consideration of these criteria and whether or not the document is technically complete and correct. When the committee determines that a nomination is eligible for listing, it recommends that the State Historic Preservation Officer sign the nomination and forward it to the keeper of the National Register in Washington, D.C. for review and listing. Nominations not meeting the listing criteria are either tabled to allow the applicant the opportunity to revise the nomination or not recommended for listing. We do have 5 properties proposed for listing in the National Register today. And our first one will be the Alderway Building in Portland. Robert, would you like to introduce it for us?
All right. Go ahead and begin the presentation. So the committee's first agenda item is the Alderway Building in Portland, Multnomah County. Location, the Alderway Building is located in downtown Portland. It's surrounded by a mix of retail, restaurants, office buildings, hotel buildings, other public buildings, and all mostly dating to the first 2 decades of the 20th century. The nomination argues that the Alderway Building, meets all of the general and property-specific registration requirements provided in the multiple property document of historic resources in downtown Portland from 1915 to 1931. The general registration requirements include retention of sufficient exterior and interior integrity. Needed to be built between 1915 to 1931, located within downtown Portland. It doesn't need to retain original use, is kind of the other part of the general registration requirements. The property type requirements, those include things as built to the lot line on the primary facade, be of steel frame or reinforced concrete construction, be designed with street fronting ground floor lease retail space with a separate building entry, include an elevator to access upper floors and lobby, and have a double loaded corridor with an L or U shape that is centered on an upper floor elevator lobby. The nomination argues for a period of significance of 1928. That's the year in which the building was redeveloped into a speculative commercial building, creating a commercial anchor between the Broadway Theater District and downtown. The nomination's arguing that the property has local significance under criterion A in the area of commerce. Westward development along Alder Street had reached Broadway by 1928, but that intersection itself remained commercially underdeveloped. Historically, Broadway had been a theater district west of Portland's downtown. And then developers of the Alderway building, they named it for its location at the junction of Alder and Broadway, hence Alderway, aimed to bridge these separate districts and facilitate the westward expansion of Portland's commercial hub. The nomination explains that the storefronts and retail tenant spaces, the lobby and upper floors have all been altered by tenants over time since the 1928 construction. Despite modifications to support contemporary use, however, the nomination argues that the Alderway building retains sufficient integrity to convey its significance as a 1920s commercial building. So in summary, here are some questions for the committee to consider related to this nomination. One, does it meet all of the requirements outlined in the multiple property document? Two, does it make the case for local significance under criterion A in the area of commerce? And three, does the building retain sufficient integrity reflective of its significance despite those alterations? Comments for this building were received from the certified local government being Portland, but at their review, they did not have quorum, so they did not provide an official recommendation. However, they provided a few comments. They were all technical in nature, and those were provided. And we did not receive any other public comments for this building. Does the committee have any questions for me?
Not right now.
Okay, that's okay.
Okay. I'll ask the committee if anybody has any conflicts of interest to declare. No. Okay, hearing none, move on. Turn it over for public testimony.
And we do have Carol, who has signed up to come talk as a preparer.
Yes, please. State your name and your position or relation to the nomination, and then
Sure.
whatever you'd like to tell.
I'm Carol Hamlin. I'm the primary author of the nomination. I work at Henry the Architect. I just wanted to be available for questions if anyone has any, and then also say that it was a very interesting building to research. I guess for me as a designer, because of the adaptive reuse aspect of it, which actually turned out to be a big part of the building's criterion A significance by joining the Broadway district, which is kind of historically underrepresented in existing nominations in downtown Portland with the main downtown district. And just at the time the building was built, though it's inside the boundaries of the MPD now, that wasn't really quite considered downtown at the time. And so the building's role was in pulling together this existing district that was a little bit commercial, was also the theater district, and really kind of like bringing that within the boundary of downtown. And because that critical intersection was like underutilized at the time, the 1903 electric building was there and it was very loud. That's where the power was generated for downtown. So this intersection wasn't part of Portland's commercial area until the Alderway building was established. And in fact, foot traffic downtown the foot traffic increased in the area of the Alderway building and the block beyond in the year that it opened, showing that there was a noticeable change taking place there in the patterns of where people were walking and shopping downtown. So anyway, it's just a really interesting building to research. It was exciting to get to do research about the Broadway Theater District and its role in the development of downtown. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions of the applicant?
I don't think I have a question right now, so. Anybody else? No questions. That's a different building.
Yeah, can we go back to?
So sorry.
Building you're talking about.
Well, I think that, yes, it was fascinating to read about this development of downtown Portland, and so it's well written, well researched. I appreciated all the references to historical events and the growth and the edges, and the connection to Fred Meyer, of course, is pretty fascinating too. I didn't know that.
Pause you a second. Is there anyone else who wishes to
Oh.
speak? Yeah, sorry.
We don't have anyone that signed up.
Okay.
Okay. Um, the table of alterations is extensive. And, the discussion I was a little bit concerned about integrity until I drove downtown and then I saw it and I said, nah, it's fine. It's definitely retained integrity. And I think even on the inside, even though it's changed, there's enough to give you that sense of historic use. What else did I have here on my notes before I turn it over to the rest of the committee? So as far as the integrity part goes, maybe some stronger, I don't know, some rearranging of it so that you end with, yes, this is right on, the historic property and it has its integrity. And I know it's in there. It's just that there were a lot of alterations and that's important to know. And I'm glad they're included. The only other thing is, I also thought that the map of the other discussed buildings was very helpful. And, the only thing that I questioned was the, MPD boundaries. The other thing is, echoing. Hello. The repeat of Julie. Yeah.
Yeah.
Feedback.
Do that. Were the boundaries shown? The MPD boundaries, are they listed in here?
The MPD boundaries are not visually shown in this nomination.
Or is it stated? I didn't see it in the boundary on page 33. I think that's where I was looking for it. So that might be a minor thing to incorporate.
To describe the boundaries of the MPD?
Well, or just list the streets somehow. That was just one question that I had. Other than that, I think, it tells a lot, and I think it's well done. Well, Greg, do you have any comments? Oh, you should say that.
I don't listen.
Keep rolling with it.
Okay. Cassie, you?
I have no comments.
No comments. Jackie?
I thought it was well-written and interesting, and it was interesting to see the two different architectural plans of what they thought the building would look like, and then the final. That was interesting to include too.
Mark, Steve. If you want to call you Mark. Sorry.
Oh, I have mostly technical comments, which usually means that I don't see anything that's going to sink the ship here. However, there are a few things that, in terms of, I think at the last meeting, I introduced myself as sort of the Simon Cowell of the committee, and or at times I can be that way, but and rather than take a lot of time about these things, I usually try to fill out the cover sheet pretty well, and that would cover the vast majority of them. And they're just mainly little things like, anyway, like I said, I don't get into a lot of detail about that. And I know some things are a little bit bigger, and usually what I like to do, I mean, because I'm kind of a direct sort of visual person. And a while back, we had another nomination about a certain, at one time, prominent, the only bookstore really in downtown, although there were some to the fringe. And I began to question whether all we were saving was a shell. This one does better. And so in terms of its integrity, and of course, the points made in the MPD that interior stuff just isn't going to be as strict as, let's say if it was nominated under C and wasn't commercial. So, but like I said, a lot of these things can be readily fixed. And they just have to do with references and north arrows, and things like that. So anyway, that's it for me.
Great, that'll be really helpful.
I only had, I think, two things to bring up. One was when we were talking about the list of modifications, and I guess maybe I just couldn't wrap my head around what was built for the theater versus what was built for this building. We talk about this that the theater building was converted into this commercial apartment, and in that list, it talks about when the storefronts were put in. So for me, what was there? What was the extent of the theater building? And if it was recreated into this commercial building, I missed that description. So, having that clear, or any pictures of that, what they call it, the music box theater, anything like that that can help define what was there. Because then I thought, well, did it like just burn down? Like, was it? So I missed that change of, or just more of a description of what was there originally. And then, we've, being a visual person, been pushing more and more to have the comparison buildings, like have photos of them, so we can see that comparison on how this building stands out. And I know we do that a lot when we're doing it for architectural, but I think it's still relevant to show how this was a pretty special building at the time, and unique in that sense.
One of the things and this might be just a point to clarify, but it dawned on me finally as I was going through the nomination that Fred Meyer had, this was probably his first shop, and then there were others in the downtown area, and they tended to move on. Anyway, you were sometimes a victim of when we lived in Portland, and there was still, when I was there was still the Morrison store. So it seems to me that there probably were these little satellite shops, and then finally he got into superstores and parking on the roof and all that kind of stuff on the east side where there was space and it wasn't as expensive as trying to do something downtown. So that might be just something maybe to summarize, less than a paragraph or a good footnote or something.
The Fred Meyer side of this is really interesting.
I bet it
Also.
is.
I mean, this is kind of a pre-Fred Meyer grocery, Fred Meyer era, where he really saw himself as a commercial real estate developer. That's what he wanted to be, and that's why he changed his name. And he didn't realize he was going to be a big grocery guy yet. He was almost trying to get away from that. That was like his family business. And then the Alderway building, actually, he ended up losing $50,000 on it. And at that juncture, decided to go more with the commercial grocery big business where he was doing well in this one-stop shopping model. So the Alderway building was the site of his first drugstore. And so it was a line to walk, I guess, in the nomination between putting in too much Fred Meyer and distracting, because I really don't feel like it has any criterion B significance, and I didn't want to kind of put that out there. But it is really interesting that, Fred Meyer is a big part of the Pacific Northwest, and this was one of his early starts.
Yes, it is fascinating considering we keep Fred Meyer name instead of Kroger. I know Kroger owns it now.
We try to forget.
Anybody else?
Gwen or,
Gwen.
I don't know if Gwen has any.
Yeah, Gwen, that's right.
Sorry, I keep myself muted while you're talking, just in case any sounds pop through. And I don't have any more to add. This has been very helpful to hear all the input from each and every person here on the panel. Also, I don't know how, just to make sure that I'm acknowledged when you get ready to vote, because everything is grayed out. I can't lift my hand on my thing, so just make sure that you call my name
Thanks, Gwen. Okay, well, good discussion. Julie?
Shall I make a motion?
We did have one individual online who would like to provide public comment.
Oh, okay.
I don't think it was for this building.
I believe it was Brandy Penner who had signed up to give public comment.
I think for a different building. Could be wrong.
Yeah. Hi,
Yeah.
sorry, thanks for having me. It's for the Alma Crystal Hotel in Normandale Field or Park.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yes.
We'll
Yeah.
do that.
Before we wrap up here, I wanted to, I'm hearing from the committee, there seems to be a good consensus that the building has sufficient integrity, just but some concerns about the, or at least an acknowledgement about the integrity that the building does have. Something that stuck out to me on that topic is on page 13. It talks about the upper floor plans as a requirement under the multiple property or the multiple property document. Talk specifically about those upper floors having elevator lobbies and corridors in place in the nomination, talking about that. I think given the level of alteration on those floors, I think it'd be worth the committee to consider that specific question there, that registration criteria for a building to be listed under NPD, it has to meet all the registration criteria. So on that page 13, it does have a couple of elevator lobbies intact. It does have a fragment of a corridor, and I believe that's in the nominations picture. So that would be something that I would put to the committee to, consider, and I think it's worth discussing.
I guess I'm a little confused. It does says it has, this is a requirement and then it's addressed.
Yeah, it says that it has it. My question to the committee, is that sufficient? So, my reading of the NPD would be, that most certainly those pieces have to be there, the corridors and the, and the elevator lobbies. Now, this building has some, and the question to the committee, with Robert put up here is that enough? What you're seeing there. The MPD isn't explicit, and it's not intended to be that everything has to be there, but in this particular building, with the interior alterations, question I put to you all would be, is it enough?
So what do you think is missing?
I'm letting you guys decide. If someone wants to explicitly ask me for an opinion, sure, I'll provide it.
Would you please give us your opinion?
So for me, I tend to be more of a stickler on the multiple property documents, and I would, this building got a lot of great pieces to it, but when I'm looking holistically across top and the fact that the corridors aren't there, I lean to say that's probably not eligible under the MPD because it doesn't have enough of the corridor, and I'm comparing it to what we've seen earlier. Somebody could fairly argue against me, and it's going to be the Park Service who decides. So that's why I was putting it to the committee.
But it could be eligible on its own.
I think it might have trouble writing on its own, but the MPD, yeah, it could potentially write on its own.
So is there a floor plan that shows? that
Maybe I could
change?
just clarify in the
Okay.
floor plan, if you do look at it, we don't actually know what was there. It was in a separate contract, and we were not able to find any historical record of exactly what was there on each floor. It's a little bit different than a typical office building under the MPD in that those were always intended to be commercial spaces. So for example, the floor plan that's dashed out that shows, a hallway dashed in, it shows lots of tenant spaces on each floor. There was only one provided by Clausen & Clausen to cover all those floors.
Okay.
And we know for sure that on the second floor, there were tenants that were leasing at least 2,400 feet of space. They weren't leasing those small office units like are dashed in the plans. So there were several very large tenants in this building because the upper floors were also commercial.
Sure. But that could still make the MPD problematic in that it's a requirement that you have the elevator lobbies and the corridors. So, I guess it kind of depends on,
Didn't have them
But
to
it
begin
didn't have
with.
to begin with.
then it doesn't fit the property type.
Oh, my goodness. Sorry. Robert, what is your opinion?
I mean, if we're thinking about the MPD, right? You have to look at all the different property types and think through what makes the strongest case, how does it fit? When we create an MPD, that's why it's critical you think through your building inventory so that when you're writing these registration requirements, you're not accidentally leaving things out or making it so easy that everything's eligible, right? So it can make it challenging when you're trying to narrow things down a little bit. Working with Carol and her team, I feel like we looked at kind of the other property types, if I remember right too, and this was kind of the closest one that it fit, right, if I'm remembering right. So we did kind of weigh our options of, we have this MPD, we can't just ignore it, right? So you have to at least look at it, and that's supposed to be the thing that tells you, you have something within this area that fits under this is how you determine if it's eligible or it's not eligible. So you gotta use what the MPD has to determine that.
So the MPD doesn't say if it was there historically, then it needs to be retained. It just says it has to have it.
So, I mean, the fair reason why I'm forced to ask me my opinion is I could be argued, I spent time thinking about this.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it's up to you guys to make the recommendation, but, I thought it was something that when I was reading through the nomination, I thought it was worth considering. I could be fairly argued either way, but.
So worst case scenario, it goes to the Park Service and they say, oh, it doesn't meet this one requirement, and so then we could revise the MPD.
You can revise the MPD or you can resubmit as an individual nomination.
And we have had other times where we've had MPDs that maybe don't function as well as they maybe should, where somebody's gotten close, but they'll at least say, hey, I know it says this, and it's not perfect, and so then they explicitly talk about that. So I'm trying to think of like the Ellis Lawrence one we have that uses a point scale, and so sometimes we might have a property that point scale doesn't make it eligible under the MPD, but then for whatever reason, maybe it actually is, and so, right, so people have attempted that, so that's an approach that you could consider.
Okay, I would make a suggestion that we just ask the applicant to address that a little bit stronger and, say, this is a criteria of the MPD, but this doesn't apply to this building because we don't have any documentation. The original plans didn't show any corridors, so that element is just not applicable. That would be my suggestion.
I do also think that this is another area where the building is a little bit a victim of its own success. It was developed as a commercial building, and by continued investment in the building, which unfortunately meant tenants wanted to lease whole floors and do what they wanted with them because of the desirable location, that they were then upgrading those spaces.
And I know you touched on that in different areas, so I think maybe just bringing that back to that specific criteria would, for me, that would do it.
The verbal explanation of the open spaces and no corridors. For me, I think it would be worth proceeding in that direction.
Yeah, and some of this has made me think about another piece that might be missing at least a bit. It's hard though to take a published history and then focus it down to one building in downtown. However, there are some broader themes, about a theater district that began to contract in favor of speculative commercial real estate. And that sounds like E. Kimbart McCall. And it would be nice to pull some of those bigger histories, because most of I tend to look at references being, doing what I do. And those bigger histories, and as you narrow it down to the property, I think are helpful in terms of getting the broad pattern of what happened here. This was an A, right? So just a suggestion, really. So, and I wrote it down in my comments on the cover sheet.
Thanks, Ian.
By John.
That's what you're here for.
Okay, shall I make a motion?
Yeah. Anyone else wish to? Say
Oh,
anything?
yeah. No? Okay. I move that the State Historic Preservation Officer send this nomination to the National Park Service for meeting criterion A under the multiple property document, historic resources in downtown Portland, with changes to the discussion about the upper floor corridors. As you explained earlier, I won't reiterate that, but Robert can, I think that's all I have to say, right? Okay.
Second,
Okay, any discussion? No. I would suggest inclusion of the comparison building.
Oh, photos, because they're described throughout, but
Yeah,
photos.
photos of the comparison building.
Okay.
Take that or leave it.
Oh, I will take that from the amendment.
but it's figures probably.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Gwendolyn?
When we can hear you.
Okay, we're in vote, correct?
Hey, all those in favor? Yeah,
Oh,
aye.
Do we get a second?
I,
We did.
You did.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Great. Thank you, Gwen.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just when you think you know anything.
12, yeah.
All right, our next property for review for the National Register is the Hotel Alma. Is that the right way to pronounce it?
Yeah, sounds good to me. I don't know if I'm wrong. So I'll see it.
Okay.
We'll learn.
Are the applicants here? For that? The preparer. The preparer, yes, thank you. Okay, so you heard me read the opening statement
You
before?
want to do the presentation first, or do you?
Well, yeah, but I'm just making sure I don't have to read the opening.
No, you don't need to
statement.
do the opening statement. I only did that
Okay.
once.
Oh, okay, all right. Great, then staff, I will turn it over to you. You can just pause on that.
Okay, so the committee is considering the Hotel Alma in Portland. Location wise, it's located in downtown Portland, in an area that during the 1960s developed as the center of Portland's LGBTQ plus life and culture, often called the Gay Triangle or the Burnside Triangle. For decades, the building at 303 Southwest 12th Avenue retained a strong association with the center of Portland's LGBTQ plus life and culture that began to develop in the 1960s. This amendment seeks to extend the period of significance for the property beginning in 1969 with the opening of the Pied Piper in the ground floor restaurant space, which is a nightclub that is the first known establishment in the building to draw an LGBTQ clientele. Includes the 1970s when a men's bathhouse opened in part of the hotel, and that period of significance would end in 1985 when the Majestic Hotel and Club Baths closed. The property was listed in the National Register in 2009 under the multiple property document, Historic Resources in Downtown Portland, with the earlier part, 1906 to 1914. And at that time, the building was found significant under criterion A in the area of community planning and development, under criterion A in the area of commerce. The amendment for consideration is arguing for the addition of an area of significance under criterion A at the local level for social history, LGBTQ history, as the most enduring and most representative building within the LGBTQ district of downtown Portland. The building was home to a series of overlapping uses and for the community that included a men's bathhouse, site of support for men's health, various bars and nightclubs, and a hotel. The amendment is also making an argument for criterion consideration G, because as we've discussed, the period of significance goes within the last 50 years. The amendment argues that the building played an integral role in creating Portland's LGBTQ area as it marked the west end of the Gay Triangle District with its trapezoidal footprint. The Majestic Hotel and Club Baths provided a safe space for gay and bisexual men, offering a variety of services and fostering socio-political support networks, particularly crucial during the HIV/AIDS epidemic, where it offered testing and counseling spaces. From 1969 to 1985, the entire four-story building exclusively served the LGBTQ community, making it unparalleled in its breadth of support and services in Portland during that time. The amendment also documents alterations to the building since the 2009 listing. So just to kind of bring up to speed what has changed, if anything, since then. That includes things like a second stair being installed in the building, a couple other minor changes to room partitions, layouts that were mostly on the south side of the building. A soaking pool was constructed in the basement, and there were dining, kitchen, and prep areas on the ground floor and basement that were renovated and altered. So questions to consider for this nomination is, does the amendment make the case for local significance under criterion A in the area of social history, LGBTQ history? Does the amendment justify criteria consideration G? And does it retain sufficient integrity reflective of that additional area of significance proposed? We did receive comments from the certified local government with their recommendation of the nomination. They didn't have specific comments other than kind of they didn't have specific comments relating to the content, but did commend the effort that we're here and offered a kind of a few additional thoughts to consider. We did receive public comments as well. Generally, that included support that this history is being added to an already listed building that previously did not discuss that history. Also that they wanted to emphasize the importance of the building's long existence and that it provided a safe place where the community came together and it offered information and testing during the HIV/AIDS epidemic. Does the committee have any questions for me?
I have one question, and it's just a clarification in the form itself. It talks about, whatever page that is, the number of contributing or non-contributing resources. So it says 0. That just because we still describe the hotel, the building and everything else, but we're not.
It's already listed.
It's already listed.
It's one of those weird technical things. Like you saw one the other last meeting that was listed in a historic district that were nominated individually. So it also had a 0, but it included the garage as the contributing resource. So it's just a park service.
So that is correct. It's supposed to say 0 and 0.
It's how they do their counting.
Yeah.
So kind of the same
Being
thing with the period of significance, it just lists what this document is addressing, not.
Right. So the idea is this just gets appended to the original nomination. You can always take the approach of kind of completely rewriting the entire thing to include all of it in once, or you can just do just for whatever you are amending in a single document that just gets attached.
I had a question about it too, and this doesn't have anything to do with the focus of this amendment, but I think there'll come a time when McMenamin's renovations are probably they'll come to the surface. And, they do have an effect on properties. A lot of the time it's good, but this is kind of ignored and maybe they don't really have to address it, but I just thought, it wasn't until the end that I found it kind of dawned on me. I mean, that's something. But that could just simply be as a comment that they came up with. So.
Any other questions of staff? Well, we'll ask, are there any conflicts of interest? Gwen, any conflicts of interest?
Got our hand raised.
That Glenn's hand?
That is, Brandy's
Brandy.
hand
Oh, that's
up.
Brandy.
She's registered to speak.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. Okay, so we will turn it over for public testimony. We'll prepare it. We'll come forward.
Afternoon. I'm Kristen Miner, she, her pronouns. And I, will keep my comments quite brief for now. I am definitely here to answer any questions you might have. But I did want to just make a few acknowledgements and also to say that this was my first experience in writing an amendment to a nomination. And in my naivete, I thought it was going to be easier than writing a nomination in the first place. And I proved myself wrong, although maybe that's partly the nature of the significance that this building has. I do really want to thank the City of Portland, the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, and a few of those folks are here today. It was definitely on their initiative that this LGBTQ project started, and of course their funding and support for not only this nomination, but another one you'll hear today. And I also want to acknowledge Don Horn, who was a primary reader and editor of this nomination with me and helped me greatly. Also several others on the advisory committee assembled by Kayla McGrail at the city. With that, I will leave it and let you call other testimony, but I'm happy to come back up and answer questions.
Any questions of Kristen? Thank you. Do we have other people? Okay, that's right. Brandy, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, yes, thank you. Sorry about the hand raise. Got a little crazy with the buttons, but I appreciate the time. Hi, I'm Brandy Penner, she, her pronouns. I am the program manager of Elder Pride Services at Friendly House here in Portland. Thank you for creating the space today for public comments on the importance of recognizing our LGBTQ+ historic places across the state. And of course, the location we're talking about today, Hotel Alma, has played a vital role in LGBTQ+ history as a site of multiple gay businesses, HIV/AIDS health initiatives, the longest operating gay bathhouse on the West Coast, and of course, a fixture in the creation of the Burnside Triangle, an area of refuge that provided safety and community for LGBTQ+ Portlanders and visitors at a time when the city was often unwelcome and unsafe. Working with LGBTQ+ older adults is not only fulfilling, but also incredibly eye-opening. This is the generation that suffered through legalized discrimination, faced involuntary psychiatric hospitalization, government-sanctioned violence, and lived in fear of losing employment and housing. So physical buildings and spaces really became beacons of safety, community, and joy. And it's in these spaces that people could feel a sense of belonging because of who they were, not in spite of it. Recognizing our Oregon LGBTQ+ historic spaces is not merely performative. Acknowledging past injustices and creating space for healing, recognition, and celebration is vital. Thank you so much for your time and for your thoughtful consideration.
Thank you, Brandy. Do you have any questions or comments for Brandy? No. Okay. All right. Any other members of the public who wish to speak about this nomination? Okay. All right. Turn it back over to all of us because we don't have our staff, or not staff, our lead reviewer. So, Julie.
Oh,
We'll start with you. Any comments you have on the application?
I thought it was well prepared and I don't really have any I think it addressed criterion G well, and having lived through that period, and it's very important, and so I was happy to see it.
Steve?
Well, I just had a few comments, and one, it's just kind of the nature of the amendment. Social history is kind of a nightmare sometimes to capture, and at least that's my view. I'm more of a landscape person myself, but just a lot of this is just copy edit stuff, and it's just things that the preparer can either take or leave. The only thing I would like to emphasize, though, at the beginning of the nomination, actually explain what the abbreviation LGBTQ means, because if like the database, we think, will live on. And I remember certain abbreviations or acronyms in the past. Today, you'd have to explain them because people don't know what it means. And I think there's this assumption that we do, and that's just a form thing, and it's a very easy thing to correct. Beyond that, there's not much you can do about a lot of it in terms of direct versus indirect evidence. And we're in the land of indirect evidence here. So it's just, I just find it harder to quantify and make those arguments for significance. And I think we encountered that once before, not too long ago, about another property in Portland. They wanted to go national, however, versus something, not as ambitious, and actually probably tells a wider story than that one did. So that's my comment.
Jackie? I thought it was useful to include the updates since 2009, and that I felt like it was good to recognize that history and understand how that worked in that area and in the community. So it was well written. Kathy?
No, I just agree with the rest of the committee. I appreciate how the detailed description of the history of the area, and I have no other comments.
Right?
I agree as well, exactly the same thing. I really appreciate the detail of the narrative. It was quite fascinating, and I agree with my colleagues.
Okay. Gwen, do you have any comments on this application?
I am really excited about this nomination and that it's doing that next level of work of acknowledgement of folks that have been marginalized throughout our history, and it as a person working with history, and that's a lot of my focus. This is part of something that we're doing in the rural landscape, and so to see this, I just love that you're building muscle tone in the Portland region as well. So thank you for this nomination. Pleasure to read it, and I look forward. I'm coming to Portland soon, so it's on my list of historic places to visit while I'm there doing business.
Gwen?
Thank you.
I think everybody else touched on anything I was going to mention, so thank you for that. Being very thorough. Ian?
I just want to say I really appreciate how well done this nomination is, and does something that I don't often see, which I just wanted to bring to note. Physically mapping the movement of the community and talking about it in a very competent way, tying a specific community to a specific place over time and tracking it as it moves, which really makes the case for this building being central within this community and central physically in that location. So I think it does it particularly well. And to Steve's remarks, that's tough to do with social history. And I think it makes good use of first person accounts and other resources to really tightly weave a narrative from multiple angles in a community whose history was not well documented in the first place. And so it's built very, very well. The one thing that I would suggest is, and because of, I think it's important, is to note that the McMiniman's restoration of the first floor is actually a hit on integrity, and to be a little more specific about some of those restoration items that actually are hit on integrity during this new period of significance. The significance of this building, I think, is a clear example of significance way overriding integrity here. There's certainly, in my opinion, enough to call for that, but I do think it needs to be just a little more explicit, so that is clear, so it does not raise a question in our reviewers. And perhaps I'm just scarred by previous comments from our reviewer, Paul Sigmund, on that type of issue. So, but I do think that it's written well enough and that the significance is good enough that we do not need to be worried about being more explicit about those alterations and how it affects the integrity.
So kind of what you were alluding to, Steve, with addressing minimums.
Yeah, because it's, you know, if you were to go there to, right now, you're faced with a minimum restoration and it's, now I don't know how it might interact with former uses or not, you know, so it's just something that it should be addressed because it's very obvious at the moment, but it's a minimum.
And someday it will be amended to include the amendments in there.
It may be.
Okay. All right. Well, any other questions of the preparer or the staff? Who would like to make a motion? Maybe our new committee members might want to take, no, you've only heard one. Okay, I won't put you on the spot.
I move to approve the nomination for, is it Hotel Emma?
I second.
You have to rephrase that to say, I move to recommend that SHPO forwards the nomination onto the keeper at the National Park Service.
All right, I move to approve, or to recommend that SHPO forwards the nomination onto the National Park Service.
And I still second.
And you still second, okay, second that was you.
It's good.
Second.
Wonderful, all those in favor? Aye.
I
Great, no opposed? Wonderful, thank you. Be a great one to have on our website as a reference, like, it's not too late to add significant history to previous nominations.
Sure, reviewer.
Okay, moving on to our third application for today is, you're right, I don't have to read that again, so I'm just reading that.
I mean, you can, it's
No.
just a lot of words.
It is a lot of words. The Normandale Field in Portland. And Robert, would you like to introduce this project to us?
Right.
Project, this application.
So Normandale Field is located at the south end of Normandale Park, mostly a residential neighborhood in northeast Portland, around 57th Avenue, just north of I-84. The period of significance in the nomination is argued for 1948 to 1964. The field was constructed as a showcase for Portland's national champion women's softball team and a revenue generator for the city. It was completed in time for Portland to host the 1948 National Amateur Softball Association softball championship tournament. During the period of 1948 to 1964, the field was the home field for the Irvine Florist softball team and became a safe space and affirming place for LGBTQ plus women. The significance ends in 1964, where following Coach Lynn's death that year, the Florist players scattered to other teams. The nomination is making an argument that the field is significant at a statewide level under criterion A in the areas of women's history, as well as entertainment and recreation. The field is also locally significant in this argument for LGBTQ plus history in Portland as one of the few known gathering spaces in Portland for lesbians or queer women. Renamed Irv Lind Field in 1965, the ballpark is the first and only sports facility in Oregon to be constructed primarily for a women's major league team or any team sport. In regard to alterations, as the nomination explains, Irv Lind Field retains its location, design, setting, feeling, and association, and argues that it retains much of its materials and workmanship from the period of significance. The identified character features reflect a link to the Florist players and their fans who experienced the field as it was in that time period. As for alterations, both the press box, bathroom building, and the concessions building have been altered over the years, but these structures still physically define and separate the field from the surrounding neighborhood. Despite those minor alterations, the nomination argues that the individual components of the field are interwoven and create a place that was remarkable for its time, and little is changed today. So some questions for the committee to consider with this nomination. Does it make the case for statewide significance under criterion A in the areas of women's history, as well as entertainment and recreation? Does it make the case for local significance under criterion A in the area of social history, LGBTQ history? And does the resource retain sufficient integrity to reflect that significance? We did receive a recommendation from the certified local government. And we did not receive other public comments ahead of this meeting. Does the committee have any questions for me?
Could you help describe what takes something as being locally significant up to a statewide significant level?
So you mean the distinction between local and statewide? Sure. So you got to first evaluate what is the significance. So determine that. And then the comparative analysis is generally what's going to help you understand the bigger picture with that. When we're thinking about statewide, doesn't necessarily mean we need to consider every single county, but we need to understand how it has a statewide impact of some sorts. So sometimes it could just be, you know, a rarity element to it. Maybe we're thinking architecture and it's like the only style in the entire state, or it's the thing that inspired all of the other stuff. So sometimes you can have that. Other times you can have it in the larger context of things. How did it influence other trends? Was it a catalyst for certain things? So that's sort of what you're thinking about. Think of your areas of significance. If we're thinking entertainment, recreation, or women's history, how does it fit statewide in that larger story? Does that kind of help you work through that? Okay.
And comparative properties.
And those should reinforce what you're thinking with that. Yeah.
Any other questions of staff? Do we have the preparer here?
Can be Kristen wants to come up there.
Thank you. State your name again for us,
Yes,
please.
Kristen Minor. And I guess my comments on this nomination, again, I'll try to keep it quite brief, but I did want to kind of apologize, although I don't think there was, as I could see it, a way around it, by handing you a nomination with 3 separate themes or areas of significance. It's makes the nomination a very long read, and I appreciate that and apologize, but I do think that combining women's history, LGBTQ history, and entertainment and recreation, they were so indivisibly intertwined that I definitely felt that this nomination deserved to go into all of that history. Let's see.
I will make some very brief acknowledgements since I have a few seconds up here. I want to thank the City of Portland Parks Bureau. Not only were they the agency who was responsible for constructing this field for a women's team in the City of Portland, but also they have been maintaining it and keeping it active for all of these years. I also want to say something about sources for this nomination, and specifically the Portland State University historic LGBTQ history program has been going through since I think around 2010 until possibly 2016 or so, and adding to the public record with a whole series of interviews that have been so critical for my understanding and for others' understanding of LGBTQ history. This nomination literally could not have been written without that program and without those interviews being accessible to me at Oregon Historical Society. So I really want to thank them. And again, thank you to the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability for supporting this project. And that's all I have, unless you have specific questions at this time.
I have a lot of little questions, but one thing I wondered about, and this, and I went to the dictionary too, the difference between bleacher and grandstand or stand. It seemed to me that most of what was built was really in the realm of a grandstand, but that bleachers were planned. And this is the question: were they ever built? I saw that the image showing the whole part, or the baseball, softball part of the park, and it looked like bleachers were certainly planned, but were they built in the lining the outfield?
Yes, they were.
Oh, they were.
And
Okay.
you can see it in some of the historic photographs of the site.
I saw that aerial photo.
Yeah, they had, well, now I'm gonna have to think about those words as well, grandstands versus bleachers, because I'm not sure I've thought about that enough. But they did have what they called temporary, that would be removed and replaced. I don't know where those were stored, but they were for use at the field, and they were set out during, these larger games surrounding the field.
Yeah, and I know those would normally be classed as bleachers, usually cheaper seats, et cetera. So, yeah.
Thank you.
My question was, how is that field being used today?
It's still being used as a municipal softball field. In fact, I believe Little League plays there quite regularly, and then some adult leagues.
Do we have a women's softball team that plays there, or even local, small ones?
That's a great question. I think that there are some women's teams, women's adult teams. I don't know if there's still a women's division or league, but I can find out. I don't know that right now.
I was just curious, yeah.
I'll just ask, my only big question on this, and I'll just ask your input on it, is the addition of the restroom facility, and you say it doesn't detract from it. Tell me a little bit more how you came up with that conclusion.
Yeah, sure. It definitely took some sleuthing for me to figure out what happened over time. There was initially that sort of concrete volume, the one-story piece that was constructed in 1948 for the field. They had a different sort of radio announcer's booth
that was constructed on top of it that later was removed and replaced with a different, I believe that was 1953 or so, when they replaced the upper piece, the radio announcer's
Okay.
booth. So I would say that it still falls within the period of significance. Yes, there have been changes to it. But it still is kind of one of those secondary pieces within the berm itself that defines the field.
I don't know if you can pull up pictures so everybody else can see what we're looking at, but.
That'd be great. Because I have a question when you're ready.
Okay. Go ahead, Gwen, ask your question.
Yeah, I kind of want to like go off of what Jackie had mentioned about if there are any LGBTQ plus teams that are around, and that you answered that you maybe that wasn't something that you dug into as much, and I think that it would I just want to ask or say that it would be, I think, of great value to tie that history to the present so that it can be, because it doesn't mean that there aren't teams out there that they could have an extra place to play or to be in that historical thing of use for the space for how it was originally inspired. So do you have any plans to do anything like that, or are there people that were part of those teams that could be interviewed, and just to have that connection to a sense of place for a group of people?
Yeah, thank you for your question. I have a couple of answers to that, I think. One of them is that, yes, I have had the opportunity to speak to at least one woman who played on that field as a rival, actually, of the Urban Florists. She was part of the Dottie Moore's pennant shop team. But there are other interviews, again, that I've relied on very heavily for impressions about how it felt at the time. In my consideration about the period of significance, I found that there were some LGBTQ teams, specifically lesbian women's team called the Lavender Menace. And they fielded not only a couple of softball teams, but I believe some other sports as well. Perhaps bowling comes to mind. And I briefly did consider bringing the period of significance closer to the present because of that those teams were operating. But the more I looked into the Lavender Menace, just looking at, the newspapers and where these teams were playing, they weren't always playing at Normandale Field. And so I wasn't able to make that strong a connection as I was to the specific team, the Erdland Florists, who played at this field until 1964. There also, then I'll say one last thing, was reportedly a team, a women's team that was going to start playing at this field in 2021. And I haven't heard any more about that, but I think I do need to kind of find out if that fell through. But anyway, I could say more about that if I can find out more about that recent team.
Thank you so much. This has been another wonderful nomination to read through and to see the work that you've done on it. Thank you.
That's the photo that you were after.
That, and then the one that shows the newer building.
Wait, sorry, which building? Or if you know the photo number, she can pull it up.
Yeah. Oh, just on page 62.
62. Thank you.
Page 54 has that aerial photo, which I think is really, and does show bleachers around the outfield.
Are you sure they're bleachers?
Well,
Good question.
yeah, some of this I'm projecting, but you know, just having been, anyway, in sports for maybe too long, that I know that the pricing difference is.
It says bleachers on this plan.
Yeah.
But so what was your question about they added the second part of that? Is that what they did in 53? Is that when they changed it?
Yeah, if you just kind of comparing that aerial image from 47 or 48, versus what you saw on this page here. And does, you know, the change of that structure detract from its integrity? Is it okay? Because obviously it has changed, but that's not the main.
But it's in the period of stuff.
Built in 1998.
Oh, I thought it was 53.
Oh, I thought it was saying that in 1998, it was, exterior doors, bathroom fixtures, and concrete slab was replaced. So the building wasn't built, it was just minor
Updates to it. Okay.
Oh. In terms of design, was the record good enough to maybe, if only infer where because that softball field looks so much like certain baseball parks like Lentz, which of course the Pickles play in at the moment. But and I guess most of my questions, maybe I'll wait till I'm or should I just go off on it now? Okay. Well, of the three, I mean, I recognize how difficult it is to kind of, you know, this is a local, or is it a statewide?
There's statewide under two criteria and local for that.
Okay, that's how difficult it is. Most of my focus, and I thought that in terms of offering comment, was really on the sports side of it. And what I wanted to know more about is how softball has been structured through time. And to win a national championship, how was that? Was it won in a tournament fashion, or was there some great broader? Because when you look at the photos from the early 50s and the 40s, this was a big deal to have a park like that. And that's one very, you can't argue with significance there, especially if there's no other facility that's purpose built for softball in the state. I don't see how anyone could argue with that. I am interested in how these things, how much of softball in its evolution, it probably did, I mean, just because the rules are so close, followed from baseball. And I wanted to recommend a book that I read in just by chance from 2017. It's called How Baseball Happened. And it puts all the Abner Doubleday a lot of that's baloney, you know. And it gets down to how it was an urban sport that really came mostly from New York City. And the Civil War actually found it was the diffusion, the agent of diffusion, and that got the rest of them. And what often happens is the losers in the war wind up becoming the better players. It's one of these things that compensates through time. But I noticed that within sports history, it's really not history at all unless you have some, and this is where your other two elements come in. What's the society doing relative to the sport? Now that's sometimes a harder question to answer when you don't have a national stage, but in this case, and almost wonderfully you do. You have a 1944 championship and a 1960, and the guy dies at the end. How perfect is that for the national register? So anyway, those were most of my questions. Is how do we, what happened and how do you put it into context in terms of how big is softball, how big is women's softball, and how does Normandale factor into? I think you've got a good basis, but I just wondered if the record is good enough. I mean, and I don't want to send you to a sentence of 2 months looking through newspaper articles.
Oh, I've done
And then compare the Journal versus the Oregonian, So that was basically, and I think with the first property we looked at, I've got one of those cover sheets that will hit the high points. Anyway.
Any other questions of the applicant? Thank you. Applicant, sorry, I keep doing that. Prepare.
I think it says that, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yes. Okay, would anybody else like to speak in favor of the application? In support of the application?
You have one online.
Hi. Thank you. Is this the right time? I'm sorry, I got cut out for a second. Great. Okay. Thank you. Brandy Penner again, she, her pronouns. As the program manager of Elder Pride Services, I work with LGBTQ plus older adults every day to ensure that their voices are heard in creating safe systems and places where they can celebrate and thrive. And one such place is Normandale Park. Not only was this a place of sports and community, but it was also a sanctuary for LGBTQ plus folks to come together and enjoy an American pastime. The ball field represents not only the first and only sports facility in Oregon to be constructed primarily for women's major league team, but also the only public space outside of bars and private homes for LGBTQ plus people to connect during an incredibly conservative era. Advancements and setbacks mark the history of women in sports in the US, and even the idea that women could and would enjoy playing and watching sports was not a widely held belief for much of the 20th century. And nonetheless, places of safety and celebration like Normandale Field were created thanks to passionate advocates and allies. It is because of these efforts that we're now living in a time when women can legally access sports and enjoy physical competition. But we are still living with the legacy of a generation that has limited to a very small number of places where they could openly recreate, enjoy the company of other LGBTQ plus folks, and thrive. Pursuing Normandale Field as a location of historical significance to the LGBTQ plus community is essential to preserving not only Portland's, but the state's LGBTQ plus history for decades. Thank you again for your time and thoughtful considerations.
Thank you, Brandy. Any questions or comments for Brandy? Very good, very good. Are we, Steve,
Oh, I think,
continue on?
well, no, not really. I just thought I think I covered pretty much everything in that, the last passage of the play. And hopefully nothing will come out of left field either. But that's what I'm worried about, that, you know, you've got the three parts, and hopefully Paul will like this too, so.
I have a question for you, Steve. When the comparative, the evolution of women's sports, I thought was well addressed. Are you saying, how does it compare to?
Well,
what?
what I was looking for was softball specifically.
Oh, I thought that was, okay.
So what's the structure of softball? And that's a good question to ask, not only at the amateur level, but if there's a semi-pro level or a professional level. In that, and that's how you can sometimes compare how big a sport is. Is it part of the national mindset? Or is it just a nice thing to play, you know? And there's some evidence that as far as women's sports goes, that really softball was the leader. Now, maybe soccer has overcome it in the meantime, but in those early years.
New Deal, that would be New Deal construction.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you think having that would help with the argument of it being statewide significant versus just local?
Well, then you have, well, you're on the National Register either way, hopefully. And maybe it's a little more ambitious to go statewide. Then you have to do comparatives. We don't really have a district here. We have a single property. So I guess I'd recommend the local route. So, and then save the statewide for MPD as a cover document, because that's what cover documents are supposed to do. Unless there's money out there to go from starting in Ontario and looking your way west and south.
Jackie, do you have any other comments or questions on the application, the nomination?
Well, I didn't have any issue with it being a state significance.
Yeah.
I thought the argument was made the point for me, and I also think that I really enjoyed reading this nomination. There was so much in it that was interesting to me, and I didn't know, learned a lot, and that I think it's important that as it's nominated, its connection to that history comes out. So that's good to recognize it. And
I just hope there isn't a team from Medford that, hey, we were pretty good then, and we gave them to.
but they built this.
We beat them in Portland several
We
times.
built this for that championship and for that team. And it was kind of interesting that they did it so fast. And they threw that thing together, and then, you know, according to the thing, it was like such a great plan that other ball fields were like interested in constructing something similar. So I think the nomination made a really good argument for all kinds of significance.
Okay, Cassie?
Just once again, I really appreciated the really detailed history, and here the preparers' work and efforts really show in this and the previous nominations. So,
Great.
I would echo my colleagues as well, and I wanted to particularly note in the narrative that It's great to see the LGBTQ plus safe space locations that are recognized outside of our city hubs. You know, a lot of the Southwest Portland, for instance, you know, several of those sites there, but it's nice to see those outside, and especially, you know, a safe space out in the heart of the neighborhood area that is not in a downtown city hubs. To acknowledge that.
Gwen, do you have any comments to share?
I'm just, I continue to hear the reflections of each of the panelists and the answers from the nominee writer. And I mean, it just makes me excited because of the historic work that I do. And it's like it was the national pastime in the 20s. Baseball was big. And again, I don't know the differences of softball and baseball. They can't be that different. However, it's beyond that. We didn't have a lot of the other sports coming up. We didn't have, you know, it was a national pastime. So it drove the communities, whether you're rural or urban, to those spaces to enjoy an event. And so that idea of sort of developing that thread for softball, for the different leagues and the connectors, that makes it a more full story from all the perspectives and building that background. I mean, it just, all of it is really it's not just interesting, but you're giving me ideas. So thank you so much for the passion that was written with and the details that you put into it. This was also another nomination that I was delighted to read about, lifting up the voices of another group of us that live in Oregon and that are part of the American narrative. Thank you.
Oh, I agree with my comments.
Ian?
Well prepared? Nothing to add?
Nothing?
Oh, I always have something.
I know. Additional questions, comments, thoughts to think about? Well, I will ask your opinion on it having statewide significance.
So on the statewide significance, I do believe it's well established. You know, it's sometimes it's sufficient to state, and then I think it proves it is singularly unique. And I think Jackie was right when she said, you know, we have a special design facility designed to a high level of quality specifically for women's sports, and we can definitively say this is the only place that's like that. So I think it really firmly establishes that well. I wouldn't think we would get much pushback on it at all.
Robert, anything to add?
No, I don't think so. I mean, maybe the only thing I can would be if you're thinking, I think what's a little tricky when you're thinking of statewide is you kind of focus on like the team being of Portland rather than we're talking about the resource being the thing that gets built. So sometimes in the narrative, right, you're like, oh, and who they're playing, and they're playing across state lines or other teams. So yeah, but I think to me, it feels like they did the research to figure out what teams are playing, what other places are there, and this is the one. And at the time of when it's being built, all the different technology and things that's coming, it seems adequate.
How will NPS look at it that two criteria or areas of significance are being promoted for statewide and only one for local? Like, is that gonna jeopardize the application, or is that totally fine?
No, it's the only reason it would jeopardize it is if it was muddy, and it's not. It's clear what's happening here, and it states it up front. If you write a complex nomination and it's not clear what you're doing, they will say, you know, you have to provide a justification for every single criterion, every single level of significance. If you can actually do different periods of significance, you know, so everything you choose, you've got to provide the evidence for. And as Kristen was saying, part of the reason why the nomination is long is she had multiple cases to prove. So it's done, you know, I don't, I believe it will be, you know, I'll say this and then we'll get kicked back, but I believe it's done. I think it's gonna get a close reading because it is a complex nomination. It's pretty typical for it to be passed up to the reviewer. But I do expect it to be passed.
Okay,
Time to make a motion.
would you like to make a motion?
Yeah, I move that we forward, this nomination through SHPO to, the NPS in Washington DC, to the keeper's office, and, it's our recommendation that it be listed under the criteria that, and areas of significance that the preparer has chosen.
Second.
Greg's going in for the second. Yes. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor? Aye. Great. Okay, well done. Thank you. All right. Can we take a 5-minute break?
If you would like,
That happened. 5 minutes. What time is it? 12:47? 12:47 and 2:47. What happens if I take my glasses off?
So.
Now everything's free.
Yeah, this is the parks here. This is probably a school. Look at that.
Sometimes I tend to.
Which is a great example of the power of section 4 right there.
so at the next ICRC meeting, use this as a.
Yeah, these
Welcome, everybody, back to our State Advisory Committee meeting on February 16th, 2024. Our next nomination is for the Cumberland Presbyterian Church. Brandon, I'll turn it, talk to Brandon. Robert, turn it over to you.
All right, located in Albany, the church is surrounded by an urban mix of residential, recreational, and commercial properties in southeast Albany. To the north and east are single-family dwellings. Immediately south and west of the church are vacant lots. Beyond the vacant lots, south and west of the church is a park, a skate park, and a Habitat for Humanity's Restore. West of that building, that commercial building, the Restore, is the Union Pacific and Albany and Eastern Railroad lines that run diagonally southwest to northeast. The period of significance for this property begins with the construction of the church in 1892, and it continues through 1917, significant remodel, which is reflected in the building today. The church is locally significant under criterion C for architecture as an excellent example of a Queen Anne style church. The church is the only Queen Anne style church within Albany, and it's the second oldest church on the Albany's east side. Justification for two criteria considerations are provided for this property. First, the nomination explains that the church meets criteria consideration A because the church derives its primary significance from its architecture. Second, that while the church was removed from its original location, the character-defining features reflective of the architectural significance all remain, and the new location retains orientation, setting, and a general environment that's comparable to its historic location. As far as alterations to this property go, the biggest impact was the 2021 relocation of the church, which was 1,000 feet to the east. There are other minor interior alterations and related to finishes that have occurred over the years. Despite the changes, though, the nomination notes that it retains integrity reflective of the period of significance. So in summary, a couple questions for the committee to consider here is, does the nomination make the case for local significance? And under criterion C, does the property meet the criteria considerations A and B with an appropriate justification? And does the nomination make the case that the resource retains integrity? We did receive comments from the certified local government and they recommended this nomination. We also received several other public comments. The comments were provided and they generally included commendations to the team that saved the church and wrote the nomination for all the work that they put into that. Reiteration of the significance of the rarity of Queen Anne style churches in Oregon. The property, it was noted in a comment that the property was on Oregon's Most Endangered Places program since 2019. So designation is an important step in recognizing the value of reusing historic buildings in Oregon. Does the committee have any questions for me?
Okay, are there any conflicts of interest to declare, any committee members? Gwen, was that a no? Great. Okay, public testimony, would the preparer like to come forward?
Hi, my name is Liz Rapp, and I am the researcher, writer and preparer of a 5.5-year project to get this here to you. Do you want me to go ahead with my comments?
Yeah.
I'm here to answer questions. I also want to thank the core team from the Cumberland Community Event Center who answered my questions every time I said, could somebody meet me down there? I need to take a look at the front door again or something. And those people are sitting behind me, Emma Eaton, Joel Orton, and Cameron Settlemeyer. And couldn't have done it without them, but I also couldn't have done it without about 30 local historians throughout the Willamette Valley, because in my research about both Queen Anne style churches, Cumberland history, Cumberland churches, I traveled the state and talked to either in person or by email a ton of amazing local people that knew history. So one other thing that is not in the application that I think is very significant, part of what we see in this church and the beauty of the church in Queen Anne structure, it is that it's very rare to have a Queen Anne style church. I didn't realize that when I started the application, but as I got into the research, I started to realize how few Queen Anne churches there really are. I reached out to local historians, but on February 3rd, just about 2 weeks ago, I received, the Cumberland Community Event Center received a phenomenal email. Some of you might be familiar with a book called A Field Guide to American Buildings by Virginia McAllister. She died in 2020. When she died, it was an unexpected complication to a physical problem. When she died, she was in the process of writing, I think I misspoke. The book she wrote was American Homes. And that was about a 880 page book. When she died, she was in the process of finishing or writing her next book, which was A Field Guide to American Buildings, so non-residential properties. And the 4 people that are writing the book or finishing her work include Dr. Evelyn Montgomery. And Dr. Montgomery sent us a letter, an email saying, requesting permission to use the church images in the new national book that will be published. And what she says, for permission to include an image of the Cumberland Church in the chapter on Queen Anne style. It's an excellent example. The style is rarely seen on churches, not only in Oregon, but according to our research, it was uncommon across the nation, far outnumbered by examples of Gothic and colonial revival forms. So we were excited to get that from her. So I'm here to answer any questions you have.
I have
Go ahead.
one.
Okay.
That you point out on the map where the previous location was, but was there not an aerial or something that showed how it was situated on that site, the original site?
It was,
There is one in there?
I think there should have been, I'm pretty sure we
missed
had
it,
that
so-
in, it just missed, it moved 1,000 feet. Sandy M. Wagon Road, which is National Historic Register Road, is a diagonal that goes through Albany. It moved from one point on Sandy M. Wagon Road, 1,000 feet over those railroad tracks that were referenced earlier, to the location it's in.
Yeah. So, but there's not an aerial like there is of this site plan where it shows it now.
Can you pull
Oh,
up
you
page 33?
I made it,
33, yeah, 33. I just wondered if there was. It's not,
it's easy to do.
because I can see,
Right, that would be
well, it's, I mean,
great to have if there was, it's one back when the church was there. Seems like
before it
there's-
would
We could-
move.
I mean, yeah, it'd be easy to do.
Easy,
Yeah.
Okay. That's. Well, the only question we have.
Documentation of it being moved.
I watched it.
Yeah.
Did you get video?
Yes, oh yes, weren't there's videos, right? Yes, we have videos. It was amazing. Really, I mean, literally, I took a lawn chair and I found us a coffee early in the morning, because it was done on a Sunday morning so that there wouldn't be traffic, and just fascinating.
Did they do it in one piece? I didn't.
Mhm. Well, the bell tower was removed so that there was no damage both to the bell tower or to allow to go under power lines and things a little bit more easily. But basically, yes, the rest was one. in the picture you see here, you can see, this is the cross gable current view. In your documents there, you'll see that the church was originally one room meeting house style church. And it was the remodel is within the period of significance.
Okay. Yeah, my only questions, not really questions, comments that I would like to see added to this are, I always like to see images of comparative buildings.
There are some in there. In that application.
Did,
Yes. I did that on purpose.
oh, no, there were, yeah, earlier, that's right.
Do you want
Yes.
more than that?
Yeah, there were those 2 or 3, right?
Yes, the ones, what I
And-
chose were the most elaborate Queen Anne churches of the group that
Yeah.
I went through. Of the 31 in SHPO's database.
And then I think it would be great to have any pictures or images, I mean, you're not gonna include a video, but of the physical move, just for documentation with this resource.
I know they're there. I know who took them.
No, you're right, yeah, because I know that little church. Any other questions of the preparer that anybody has?
Covered mine.
I guess I just had one, and it's strange that, given what you would normally expect from, denomination, I know in the, nomination, you mentioned how the Cumberland group came from Kentucky. And, yeah, you wouldn't expect a lot of ornament from a group like, and especially selling to the Mennonites. That's real interesting too.
They didn't know they were gonna sell the Mennonites when they.
Well, when they built it, right. But that the Mennonites would say, hey, this will be an investment, they'll want this church as well.
Yeah. It's my understanding from talking to people who designed churches that in those days often, when a congregation moved from a rural community to a city, which some people don't consider Albany that big a city, but to a city, the ornamentation was part of the way of attracting new congregation, and so they would do that. Also, in those years, it was way easier probably to do some of that ornamentation because we had pattern books and things, so it was, somebody had fun dreaming.
And the skills were still.
Yes. You'll see in the application that the carpenter, we called him a builder, but really I referenced in there that everywhere I looked, he was a carpenter. He lived 5 blocks from that construction site, so easy to get to work.
I know something because I'm close friends with Roz Meany.
Sure.
And so the spelling on page 16 is Keeny.
Yes, I know that too. Page 16.
It's probably auto-corrected, yeah. And she said she was gonna be here. I don't know why she's not.
I think she's got a letter in the group. Yes.
I'll note this up. There are numerous places where when you're documenting feet versus inches, kind of maybe got misused.
Okay.
So. Yeah, parentheses, but with this one. Possibly, yeah. And then architects that threw me off like, whoa,
What did she say?
It's just a little bit different. All right. Thank you. Are there other people who would like to speak on behalf of the owner or representatives in favor of your long-going application?
And seeing you have t-shirts.
Yes, they got t-shirts
Are you
on.
selling them?
We can.
I should have known that. My name is Emma Eaton. I'm the president of the organization. The last time you saw me here, and perhaps none of you, but in this situation was in 2011, when my husband and I, along with Roz, my best buddy, applied for the Keyhole House application. And that's in the same neighborhood, just FYI. We continue to live in that building, home, and to champion that neighborhood. We've been there for 15 years, time flies, I think it's 15 or 16 years now. And I saw this church even before I saw that home. And I decided that it needed help. And I feel that if you live in a community and there's a problem or blight or negative, you have a responsibility to contribute to the solution. If you don't, you're part of the problem. I think you can believe that. I've seen numerous changes in the community since we moved in, just in our block and beyond. And I have a tremendous amount of hope for the impact of what this building will do. Considered number one, its location. It has the potential to be a hub for so many community services because they're nearby. And we hope to really reach the people in the community and give them hope again because they seem to have lost it. I think community is really important. And I keep saying that, but we are a community center, right? You know, I mean, that's the resounding impact here. And we'll do whatever is determined by the community, what we should do. I'm sure this is not historical. This is me from my heart. This is what I do. So please forgive me. 2018, my husband and I did, no, actually it was previous to that. 2017, my husband and I sent out letters to all the churches that we could find in the area because I was involved in the historic home tour and I wanted to get that building open so I could get people in it so that they could see that there was a difference inside versus outside because there was a drastic difference. A resounding comment I got when I got people inside was, wow, it doesn't look like I think it would look at all. I mean, it was a usable building, just beside the fact that it didn't have a bathroom, plumbing, or I mean, all of that had been shut off by the city. I think you might be curious about why we decided or had to move it. I don't know if you're aware of that story, but the city council at the time didn't like us much. I don't think it was just us. I don't think they were, I think they treated everybody the same way. But anyway, politics aside, they were threatening to demolish the building. And we were given an ultimatum. You first, you sign and you start the process of making some kind of movement towards saving this building by October 1st, or suffer the consequences. Well, we got busy. And it took a while to get all of the agreements legally done with the city and the whole process. And then they made the condition that we had to buy a property. Then we had to move the building, and then they would sell us the building for $1. You know how much it costs to move a building? Yeah. I just gotta say, I had no idea. And what they told me was wrong. But anyway, consider 2021. Just know that our hearts are in the right place and that this building has a lot of stories to tell and they're slowly coming forward. And I think that's evidenced by the letter that we have from David Hackelman, because you couldn't find it. I mean, I found one person that was a descendant that came forward earlier, and he wanted to expand the Hackelman district because I don't know if you're aware, but the Hackelman houses aren't inside that district as it sits right now. And he felt that was a wrong. And he started working on that, but he died in 2020 or 2021. So I'm sorry that that didn't happen. I hope someone champions it. I have to do one thing at a time. The other thing was finding David Hackelman and that he showed up at our ribbon cutting when we were reinstalling the steeple. I did, okay, I don't get this, you know, moany face very often, but I kind of went, wow, a real Hackelman right in front of me. He must have thought I was silly. But anyway, he didn't get scared off and he was more than happy to write the letter. And Roz would like to have been here, but she had some things come up. But she's my hero in my part because she helped me with the Keyhole House and she very much willing was able to help us with this. Thank you for your time. I don't want to ramble. I do it often, but I just wanted to put the heart in this.
Thank you. Motivated you to come up, huh?
So I'm Cameron Solmeyer, this is the Cumberland Community Event Center. I want to talk briefly just about the move and not so much why. As Emma noted, the why was because we had to save the building. If we could have left it where it was, that would have been better, would have been easier, it would have been cheaper. But we had to move it to save it. When the move was done, we were very careful about trying to keep it in one piece other than having to detach the steeple, but also the placement of the building. So when we moved it as close to the original site as we possibly could. We wanted to serve that same community. We didn't want to move it to a different area. We wanted to serve the local community that it was already in. But also making sure that it was in the same orientation it was before. I mean, we can certainly get a photo if it's not in the application of the setting that it was in before as well. It's aligned to the north. It's at the same angle it was before. It's on the Sandy and Wagon Road, the same as it was before. It's just 1,000 feet down the road, but it's on the same road. It's still in the Hackelman donation land claim that it was originally sitting on. So it is still in that same setting that it was in before. It's not in the identical location, but it is still the same. Yeah, it's as close as we could get. You know, it's not like you have a choice of any spot you can move it to. It has to be vacant land there. But we moved it as close as we could. It's still in that same setting. I just want to make sure that people know that same setting, same angle, same Sandy and Wagon Road on the same donation land claim.
Thank you. That's important. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Great. Wow. Ian or Robert, do you guys have any comments to? So being the lead reviewer of this one, I found like that it was a very well written nomination. I think it did hit on the significance of all the criteria really well. As I mentioned to Liz, I would like to see some information just documented, included in here on the documentation of the building move. And then there's a couple little typos, but that always happens. I agree, Julie, to get an aerial image of the church in its original location, especially since it wasn't that long ago that it was moved.
If possible.
Yeah.
But I think the statement that it's same orientation.
Same orientation, same exact angle and everything.
Yeah.
I was wondering if, why is it off? But yeah,
Not that they're that picky about it, but I've been in a situation where it was questioned, so.
So we'll start with Gwen. Do you have any comments to add to this nomination?
I don't have any additional. This is such a beautiful example and the new information. I was looking through my old house dictionary to see if I could find any more, and it was just really well done. So aside from everything that's been said, I'm going to pass.
really spice it up here. How about Jackie?
No, I enjoyed reading this nomination. It was very well written and some interesting history about how the architecture changed and got the addition, and then that they dug a whole basement out in the 1930s by hand. And then just interesting and just a great amount of work that went into it. And the other thing that was kind of interesting is I looked on Google Earth, because sometimes I do that on Street View, and I could see it in its previous location.
You could.
But only from the aerial. So I went to look for it, how it looked before it got restored, because I was just curious, and it disappeared.
If we go to the street view?
Yeah, and then it wasn't in its new spot yet. So it was kind of.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
So
Google
it was
Earth.
kind of interesting. But no, that I thought there were some, it was great and interesting to see, and just an amazing amount of work that got done. So in a relatively short period of time, so.
A real testament to how a community can come together.
Yeah.
I mean, you guys even made shirts. Okay, Julie?
Same, that was great. And I applaud the community for taking care of it.
Steve?
Not much in the way of comment. I did have a question for the group. Jeff Sanders, about how old is he?
80s, near 88.
Okay.
Like that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if you ever coached church league basketball at Albany, I played for United Presbyterian. So it's just strange. I spent junior high and high school in Albany. So I have the only comment I have to add here is there was some reference about the valley being very fertile. And if you've ever dealt with, now some of it is, especially the alluvial parts, but that clay is miserable. And I hope they didn't have to dig that basement out. Anyway, that's all. But otherwise, a great job. It isn't often that I put all the, check marks are all in a line for the okay section of our cover sheet.
Cassie?
I do agree with the suggestion to include revisions to include information about the move original location. I think that'd be really helpful for that documentation and for future reviewers, for folks wanting to know more about community history. But I think other than that, I don't have any other comments.
Greg?
Yes, I have a comment / question, a minor one, in no way worth compromising my support for this project, but in the history component on page 14, talking about the history of the Cumberland Presbyterian Church, it speaks specifically in there about how this group was expelled from the core body due to what was thought to be a temporary disagreement in principles and practices. Do we know if that was one of those principles and practices was slavery?
No.
Okay. Yeah, if you don't mind, because I know that was a big issue with the Presbyterian Church at the time, in other denominations.
I've done a lot of research on whether slavery was a part of it because it's brought up periodically. Part of the problem with the founders of the Cumberland Presbyterian Church was that they came from the Southeast, where slavery was more predominant. And yet in my research, I find that people used the slavery card as a reason to be anti-Cumberland Presbyterian Church, but the research shows they weren't really specifically pro-slavery. It depended on where the churches, where the congregation met and what they felt more than the church body. The other thing I wanted to explain about that. They left the Presbyterian church body because the Louisiana Purchase had just occurred. So all of this land west had opened up. But the Presbyterian church believed that ministers needed to be highly educated. The Cumberland sect, which was a part of the Presbyterian church, said the Methodists are doing it, the Episcopals are doing this. They're sending lay ministers west with the wagon trains so that they would have religion and support and community as they headed west. And the Presbyterian church refused that. So that was the core reason that they separated from the Presbyterian church, was to allow lay ministers to come to Oregon. And other states, all of that westward movement.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you. It helps a lot. I bring it up because if slavery were an issue either way, I think it would just be important to.
Yes, and I never found any information that led me to believe it was a core principle of the Cumberland Church as a whole. And in fact, nowadays, the Cumberland Church is a highly, what still exists of it in many congregations are a lot of people of color. So it's kind of interesting.
So while you're here, on that same page, you say affiliation as Cumberland Presbyterians.
Yes.
So I hadn't heard that.
Presbyterian.
I hadn't heard that term before.
Yes, Cumberland, it is a group of the Cumberland, the Presbyterian Church existed in 1800. And then the Cumberland, this group of people in the Cumberland River Valley of Tennessee and Kentucky were expelled from the Presbyterian Church, and they called themselves then Cumberland Presbyterians.
So this says something about the Second Great Awakening?
Yes, it's a religious term for a period of time around 1800. I'm not an expert on the religious part of it, other than the background of the Cumberland.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. So the name comes from the
location,
as in Cumberland Gap.
Yes.
Right. It's
Yes.
not the British, which has a very, I was
Different.
gonna ask you about the Order of the Orange and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. My research for this church began when Emma and a group recruited me to give tours in 2018 of the church when it was open for one of Albany's historic homes tours. And I said, why is there Cumberland Church in Oregon, in Albany? And so that started my research. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I know we lose some significance when we move something. I don't find that this has any question of its integrity and everything else that goes into being listed under criteria C, except for obviously the site. I think adding more information on the reason for the move and the reorientation of it as best as possible to match the existing location will help support that they've done everything they can to reinstill, if you will, its original siting. So I would make a motion that we approve forwarding this nomination through SHPO to the keeper, with the inclusion of some minor edits, images and description of the building being moved, and an aerial image of the church in its original location, any other photos of it from its original location to justify its new location.
Second.
Second. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor? Aye. Glenn?
I was just kind of taking a second look. I'm under, and I'm. This work is so critical throughout the state, and again, it's like I want to know more. There's more information out there in regard to like just the different records of the congregation and but I'm going to say and just I'm a little uncomfortable, but I'm a little uncomfortable, but I can say I on this particular piece.
All right, thank you. All right. Okay, great. You're just one step closer. I mean, go celebrate. This is a big deal. Yes. Thank you. Really well done, you guys. All right, we have one more to review today. And that is the Dallas Downtown Historic District.
All right, ready?
Woo!
Okay. The historic district under consideration today is centrally located within Dallas city limits, with residential development extending outward from the historic district. Oregon Route 223, also known as Kings Valley Highway, passes through the center of the historic district, and traffic splits along Main Street and Jefferson Street. The historic district is located entirely within the 1856 town of Dallas Platte. The district's period of significance that's proposed begins in 1870 with the addition of the second story for the local chapter of the International Order of Oddfellows, the oldest extant and visible building in downtown, and ends in 1955 with the comprehensive commercial storefront and first story facade remodel of 827 to 831 Main Street. The Historic District nomination is arguing for local significance under criterion A in the area of commerce. The district reflects the development patterns of Dallas from its early construction through the early post-World War II era and contains the historic downtown business core of the city. Additionally, the nomination argues for local significance under criterion C in the area of architecture. The 31 contributing buildings in the district demonstrate historic trends in commercial construction, with representatives from each key development period reflecting a range of downtown building designs, styles, forms, and functions. The nomination evaluated the integrity of buildings based on plan, cladding, and window, including storefront changes. Contributing buildings retain the majority of these features and are able to convey historical associations. Non-contributing buildings are mainly due to substantial irreversible alterations that were made outside of the period of significance. Only one building within the district was found to be non-contributing due to being built outside the period of significance. So in summary, a couple questions to consider. Does the nomination make the case for local significance under criterions A and C? Does the nomination clearly define the threshold between contributing and non-contributing resources? Is there sufficient integrity to reflect the significance of the historic district? And is the boundary of that historic district appropriately drawn? The properties within the boundaries of a CLG, and we did not receive comments ahead of this meeting on this nomination. Does the committee have any questions for me?
Yes.
Okay.
On your required revision, section 10, you mentioned that the north end of Maine, that the area north of Mill Street includes the east side, but not the west side. Was that sufficiently illustrated in the revisions?
Are you asking my opinion, or are you asking it?
Yeah, I guess so.
or something for the committee to discuss.
Well,
guess is
I just wondered, there's a picture of that side of it. I noticed that as well, and then I just wondered, there just weren't enough buildings that were contributing to the district? Is that what you found?
It can be one, what I'm thinking maybe first, maybe why don't you talk to the preparer? We have the preparers here, so maybe you can ask them how they thought of it and we could respond after. Just so
Thank
that's
you.
good. Thank you.
Shall I bring up the preparers?
Yes, please.
Okay.
First, are there any conflicts of interest for anyone to declare? Fine, thank you.
And we have the Dallas Historic Preservation Committee on the line.
Add Spencer and Katie first, because they prepared the nomination.
Okay, yes, and Katie and Spencer as well.
So Spencer or Katie? You guys can decide who goes first here.
Spencer, I can go ahead. I'll start. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Katie Pratt, she, her pronouns, with Northwest Vernacular, and Spencer Howard is with me, he, him. We prepared the nomination on behalf of the city of Dallas, and they received a CLG grant to prepare this district nomination, and it's the culmination of a series of projects to identify and document downtown Dallas. And we really, as folks who are consultants who kind of work all over the Pacific Northwest, Dallas was a delight. It's such an interesting downtown setup with the courthouse square, and how the buildings kind of front that courthouse square we thought was really special, and that how all of the buildings down there really reflect a century of downtown growth in Dallas, and they have this cohesiveness in materials and scale, as well as some very clear architectural styles. But Spencer and I are both here to be able to answer any questions that you may have about the nomination itself.
Hi, Katie. I just wondered on the boundary justification and the question about the west side of Maine, north of Mill Street. Was it that there was insufficient integrity to be contributing? Because there were how many buildings along that? I just wanted a clarification on the reasoning for that boundary line. Boundaries are the trickiest thing. So.
This is Spencer. Absolutely. We had struggled with that one as well too. We excluded those based on lack of integrity. So at the northwest corner of Mill and Main, there is no longer a building there. It's an empty lot. And then there's only two buildings extending north from that. One has extensively altered storefronts, and the other one, the second one at the far end, it has extensively altered storefronts, facade, and then a substantial wraparound projecting awning that extends along Main and then continues on the north facade, as well as a small addition off the north facade. So it just didn't seem to have sufficient integrity to be able to convey that sense of presence within a historic district on that side of the street.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
And I can add to follow up on that was we did have conversations with the team about that, to talk about that and thinking about reaching to grab in a building, looking at all the things in between.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
So I think this is maybe just a typo, but in the under number 5 classification, you've got a list of 32 contributing and 9 non-contributing, and then your summary paragraph, you have 31 and 10. So I would just like to make that correction.
Thank you for that. We'll redo our numbers and make sure we have a firm number one way or the other.
I did go through the table and I think I counted all the ones in the table fit with what's at number 5, but definitely just double check.
Are there more questions for the preparers? Okay. Katie or Spencer, do you wish to say anything else about the application or description of boundaries, integrity, anything like that?
No, other than we really enjoyed working with the Dallas Historic Preservation Commission, and that this built off of a much larger reconnaissance level survey that was done only a few years prior to us doing the work. And so it was really helpful to be able to rely on that really well done survey to be able to put this together. And that really helped us, especially because there had been changes that even happened in a couple years. So really being able to see how some of those buildings had changed and really helped us firm up what we consider to be a really strong historic core for the district.
Great. Okay. Are there other people who would wish to speak
We have
about the application?
online one other kind of a group of people.
The Dallas Historic Preservation Commission?
Yes.
Thank you.
You're unmuted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Brian Dalton. I was mayor here for 12 years or so I have some knowledge of the downtown. My family's owned properties in downtown since 1899 and owned several of these buildings. It's an amazingly well constructed and historic downtown. Among the best, honestly, in Oregon. There's only 2 counties that have courthouse quarters like ours in all of Oregon. And so it's a very much the central focus of our community, and everyone can identify where the center of Dallas is because it's right in the center of this district we're proposing. A lot of work went into this. The consultants have made up a tremendous application, I think, of history all the way back to Native Americans in the area. I really think you've got a strong application there in front of you. We're very hopeful you'll agree.
Thank you. Anyone else there at the Dallas Historic Preservation Commission? Okay, hearing nobody else pipe in there. Thank you for being here virtually with us to support the application. Robert, do you have anything else to share about the application or the questions that we need to consider?
No, I guess the only thing like has been referenced here, it is a CLD funded project, but just to note, they have kind of phased this project. So it has a long history here where they started with a survey, then they kind of and so they kind of went through all the things that you do. So it's kind of a good use of how to think, conceptualize, do a lot of public outreach, have those meetings. And so they've kind of it's been years, like they were alluding to, and so leading to this nomination. So just to clarify that, I think that was a good example of that.
It's one of these, I think it reads very well. All the groundwork's been done.
Jackie, would you like to kick us off in our discussion?
Yeah, and I understand that there are a lot of buildings and a lot of information to convey in this document, and it was good to have, you know, the tables that helped, but it was very hard for me to relate the significance and the way, you know, they were talking about how beautiful the downtown and the buildings looked with the photos and the images that were part of this nomination. And I think that some better photos would have made a huge difference in the way I view this nomination. And an easier way through the maps to kind of understand which buildings were being talked about, because I didn't have an individual image of each of those buildings. And I had to keep looking at just the one map on page 39. And I actually had to end up using Google Street View because I couldn't reference a lot of these photos with the specific descriptions and kind of understand what building was being talked about just by a number address. And that also made me think that it would be useful to refer to them by their historic names, because I can relate that idea a lot better than just with a number address, because those were hard for me to understand. And then, so mostly my major critique is just, we had 60 photos in this nomination, and we have 30 something contributing buildings, but I didn't see each building represented by a photo so that I could kind of understand how it contributed to the whole to the district, and also what changes had happened. And I would have also liked to see like a historic photo of downtown as well. And then some of the, and then I also was kind of missing a little human story about some of these particular contributing structures that were being talked about. And I understand that's a lot to, you know, a lot of research, but if there was even a little bit, even if it was in a table, that would have been helpful to kind of understand that this was the Oddfellows Lodge, or this used to be the drugstore or the hardware store. And now, you know, it has seen these other uses. Let's see.
Could you maybe address that, Robert, with doing these historic districts, right?
Yeah.
We try to keep it broad, but we have to add some of that specific detail, but I know there's always that struggle with, you can't add too much specific detail. You know, where I live in Bend, we have 2 historic districts, and so I have a lot of personal, professional experience using this type of document, and having like diagrams or a couple images of what this architectural style has been really helpful for not just me, but many applicants. So can you touch on what you traditionally include and what you don't?
So there's no one way that people do this. That's the challenge. It's a good and bad thing, I guess. And so with the historic district, you could take this end of the spectrum where it's like every building has a big old paragraph that completely describes it, a photo right along with it, and it's 400 pages. Or you could go to the other end where you just have a handful of representative photos. And so maybe when you're talking about a form, a style or whatnot, maybe you use some of those photos. You could either do it in text in the nomination, or you could say, see reference photo, blah, blah, blah. And, maybe only put 15 photos at the end, but they're close-ups of, specific buildings that illustrate that, some streetscapes, because you can also get to understand that feel for integrity. So there's kind of a balance between that. Sometimes people go right in the middle of that. So
a reviewer would also say your appendices need to support your argument. So, if you're saying this, this district is a great example of one part block buildings, and you have exactly 0 pictures of one part block buildings, they're going to say, that's a deficit, we would like to see those. So, it's a certain amount of, Robert's absolutely correct, it's huge variation, but also, you gotta have the right stuff too, so it's not just about volume on one end or the other, is do your appendices fully support. Some of the Park Service reviewer staff, you can see there's a table in there with the contributing non-contributing properties. Comment we got back, maybe say 10 years ago, said that's way too much information. It was a different reviewer. So even among themselves, they tend to vary quite a bit. So I guess, within any kind of documentation, does it demonstrate what it's trying to argue sufficiently?
Yeah, and I didn't know, like, in that big table that starts on like page 50, and it talks a little bit about why they're non-contributing and just some really very general information about changes, but and I never know whether that it should stay general or be a little bit more specific, like, I don't know.
And so that is part of our general practice of when people do historic districts, they also work as part of that survey, they submit that survey to us. It gets entered into our database. And so that's a printout that we have designed. And so the way that it's set up is it is very limited information. So there's not, there is a way to add a lot, but it's intended to be concise and short. As just here's a quick snippet of that. So it's, here's the character features, and then is it contributing or not? The text, the narrative of the district nomination should be where you say, this is how you determine that. So, yeah.
I think something to keep in mind is that, for this committee, you're looking at the National Park Service, the National Register of Historic Places, documentation standards. Now, while we do have land use laws here, they get agitated if we try to start cramming too much of that into the nominations. We do also provide, Dallas is a certified local government, and we would provide them grants to develop if they chose design guidelines or other documents, further documentation, whatnot. That's where we see a lot of that successfully live for land use purposes. If they choose to do that, they're not necessarily obligated to, but they can get that granular level detail, and they often build off of these documents. For that, we found that National Register nominations are pretty weak when it comes to doing land use because they're a different kind of document. So that's neither here nor there for this group. You still have, the ability to ask for more documentation or different documentation if you'd like, but just you're based on what Heidi was saying, some of your questions want to kind of give you a little more context there for.
Yeah, I struggled a little bit with trying to figure out what was what, but I did find that the resource forms map on page 40 showing which buildings were the different heights was very helpful. But maybe some of the photos could just be cropped so you can see it a little closer out. I don't know. It is fine line.
And then, yeah, and also there's all these other maps that have the different types of buildings, and it would just also be helpful that those addresses that are referenced in the text are on each of those maps as well. So I don't, it's easier to see at a glance. And then there wasn't really a very clear current aerial in there. Because it was a little faded in the background, and that might be helpful too. And then is it common to include a photo of the corners of the boundary? Because there were a lot of those and they were not helpful. So I didn't know whether that was something that was a standard.
Yeah, it's not
thing.
a standard, but they do ask that you do show larger viewscapes of what does it look like, because you're also thinking of the big integrity question of the district as a whole, so you need to see those. It's not, you don't have to have every corner represented, but you need enough to get a sense of setting and viewing.
So I know they want a specific photo size, but in lieu of seeing half of your photo that's just the street, is there any exception that they can crop those images so they're like a panorama? I mean, it's not gonna be a panorama, but.
Well, I guess there's two things. The photos that are at the end of it, so there's that printout we were talking about where it has every record. Those all have individual building photos that are like this big, all right? The photos that are at the end could be completely different photos. If you guys wanted that, that's something you could do that are more representative, that are close-ups, that are, you know, this or that. So you could always do that and it could be limited to 15 or something like that. That would be an option for that. They could take some of the ones that are existing, and if it's easy to crop it, I don't know what that would do with resolution and quality, right? Because we also were thinking long-term for that.
So generally the photos need to balance broader generalization type shots, overall streetscape, and then the specifics within whatever context they're arguing. So for instance, if they're talking about, you know, the streetscape significant, Park System want to see that streetscape picture. Or if it, you know, and you asked about, one of you asked about the, you know, the corners and the boundary issues. You know, for instance, they might want to see a photo that would show that boundary we just discussed, you know, just kind of a visual. Not maybe of that street, because they're like, why are you giving me photographs of something that you're not even trying to list? But maybe, you know, something would show more of that edge. So again, it's whatever they're trying to argue, just making sure the appendices line up with that. And there's, you know, Bob and I are not trying to be cagey. It's just because every one of these districts is a unicorn, you know, so it's a little bit different every single time what you're going to need.
I agree. I think there needs to be some better cross-referencing between the table, the maps and the images. You know, if this was just a whole bunch of different properties and not a district, I think there would be some easier ways to do that, but I think it makes it really hard for the reader to understand.
Yeah, and also like the photo captions and I went and looked at the map and wrote the number on my caption, so I knew what building was being talked about, and so that it would be helpful in caption in the text.
Yeah.
And then especially like if there's one of these, a couple paragraphs will talk about some notable contributing buildings and a nice front facade picture or a really clear photo of that one, of those few as examples or examples of the specific types of buildings that they're talking about would be very useful.
I think
I mean, that's mostly, you know, those are the real main issues I had, and I understand that, you know, a lot of work went into, you know, organizing it, and there's a lot of buildings to include and talk about. So.
Yeah, I'm with you. I go back to my experience using them, and not only, this one has images. Most of these that I've used before don't even have images, but they have like like I said, like a little diagram, like what are those architectural styles? And then, thinking back, they actually have a very brief description for every single resource that's contributing or non-contributing. And then whenever a project comes up, they clip that out of there. You know, what does your historic district nomination say? And of course, you know, it was written 20 years ago, so things have changed, but.
That used to be the office practice
That
prior to about 2005.
Okay, so they don't have to do that anymore.
Park Service asked us politely to stop.
To stop doing that, okay.
Sometimes it's like 2,000 of those.
Yeah, okay.
There's some shippos that do it anyway, and they just kind of grudgingly take it, but. Yeah.
Great, okay. I am with Jackie that cross-referencing is really important, as well as historic photos. I think if we're gonna provide photos, we need to have historic photos of the area.
Yeah, because it would be really nice to see the historic view and then see how much is still intact in the present day, and some of those buildings are very prominent, so it'd be nice to see that.
Julie, what kind of questions do you have?
I don't think I have anything else to add. It's, you know, there's a lot of good information, and so maybe beefing up the cross-referencing and some of the things we talked about would be encouraged. Other than that, you know, Dallas has been working a long time on this because they were doing it back when I was around, so a long time ago.
Steve?
Not much to add, there's maybe a couple little copy edits to do. But written down on the cover sheet. Yeah.
Cassie?
I just agree. I think we covered all the stuff that I had. I do think it's important to get those typos about how many contributing properties and which corrected.
Greg?
Yeah, I have nothing new either, but I agree with my colleagues here on the need for cross-referencing and also historic photos. And if for some reason there aren't historic photos, then just tell us that.
And Glenn?
I don't have any additional information to add. I think that the committee really massaged and presented some additional pieces that would be recommended, and I concur with those.
Great. Ian or Robert, anything? Any comments to add?
Well, I'm just really happy to see this. We were talking about the amount of time. I had Robert's job when we did the initial survey out there with a couple of interns. So it's great to see this kind of come to fruition. And I think, you know, it's well documented, and I'm glad to see this finally heading off to the Park Service. So perhaps.
It wouldn't be hard to add a few. This really illustrates it's kept a lot of its integrity.
Yeah.
All right, Jackie, I'll turn it back over to you. If you'd like to make a motion.
I will move that we recommend that we send this to the keeper for the National District nomination for Dallas, and with the addition of, or maybe editing the photos to include more facade photos and historic photos, and then amending maybe some of the diagrams and maps with additional information and some cross-referencing of photos, and then other additions I may have forgotten.
Thank you. Hit it. Is there a second?
Second one.
All right, any discussion? Great. Then let's vote. All those in favor to move this forward to the keeper with modifications that Jackie has suggested?
Aye.
Aye. Then there's no opposed. We all said aye. Yay. Great. Is there anything else we would like to talk about today? It's not on our agenda.
No, just one final thing is, you guys all provided dates for kind of an extra meeting that we need to have in the next month or so. We haven't confirmed we figured out what the right date is, so I'll be sending you an email. My computer's dead, so I can't tell you what that is at the moment, but it will be forthcoming. It's gonna be completely virtual online, and I can't imagine it going longer than an hour. So, but you'll see the details on that, just stay tuned.
Since we're new on, can you share, do we have the dates for the rest of the meetings?
We do, we will share those with you. I would tell you again, but it's not. Yeah, and we'll also set up some time to do a little longer of an orientation of what this looks like, and not just, hey, good luck, you're on your own. Welcome, yeah. So, yeah.
Thank you for being able to come on such short notice. We appreciate that.
Yeah.
They got appointed like 2
weeks ago?
Yeah, 2 weeks ago. Actually, I don't think it was even 2 weeks. So it's okay. Yeah.
Mary, do you need our receipts from the hotel?
They should all say 0, correct?
I have no idea.
Why don't we close the meeting?
I'll do
Yeah,
it for
that
you.
out. Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna do it.
Yeah.
Closed.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I made a motion to
That's my-
thank you all for.